What is a pedigree? Basically, it is a means to look at the family tree of an organism and determine the genotypes of the organisms within that family. It's important for us to have pedigrees so that we can see which organisms are affected by a trait and the likelihood that they will pass it down to their offspring. And from that, we can make further assumptions about those offspring. Okay. So in order for us to analyze pedigrees, it's important for us to know certain terminologies and the figures that we are seeing. So firstly, let's look at a recap of dominant and recessive alleles and how they are displayed. Firstly, capital letters are always the dominant allele. So in this example, capital B is the dominant allele. Small b or lowercase letters are the recessive alleles always. Easy way to remember it is the capital letters are bigger, larger, more dominant, and those will be the ones that are present and shows up in the trait or the phenotype. In this example, we're using the dominant allele to show black eye color and the recessive allele B, small b, to show blue eye color. Okay. Now, when you're working with a pedigree, you have to look at these shapes. Firstly, a square represents a male and a circle will represent a female. This is not always important or relevant, but it can be, so it's important to just take note of that. What is important is the fact that if a shape is shaded, that means the organism is affected by that, the trait in question. Okay? If it is not shaded, it means that it is unaffected. In this question, we'll take the black eye color to be the affected trait. If someone has black eye colors, they will show if they have a black eye color, their shape will be shaded. As example, question 1 or organism 1. If a person does not show the trait, it will be not shaded. Okay, let's get into the question. So we need to find out the genotypes of all the numbered organisms, but we're going to try and go through all of the organisms. Firstly, to start off a pedigree, the easiest way to start is to start off with those that have the recessive traits. Because a recessive trait can only have homozygous recessive alleles. In this case, any organism that is unshaded will have the recessive genotype, and in this case, the recessive genotype is described as small b, small b. So let's fill it in on the question. Anywhere that is unshaded, we will fill in small b, as I've done here. Okay, so that makes it a little bit easier so that we can then unpick the dominant genotypes. Because when you have a dominant genotype, the organism can either express one of these genotypes. It can either be big B, small b, because in that situation, the dominant allele will take preference and the trait that will be showing is the black eye color. If an organism is homozygous dominant, that organism will show the black eye color but will only have alleles for black eye colors. Okay, so that's why we have to find a systematic way of differentiating between which organisms have big B or big B small b. So in order to do that, we've filled in all of our recessive alleles, all of our homozygous recessive organisms, right? So let's look at question 1. We already found out the genotype of organism 2. So now that will help us to find out the genotype of organism 1. In order to do that, you have to look at the next generation. These two organisms, organism 1 and organism 2, gave rise to organisms that have the recessive genotype as well as the dominant genotype, i.e., they are unaffected and affected organisms in their offspring pool. Okay. In order for an organism or a pairing or mating of organisms to produce one that has a recessive allele, both organisms have to have the dominant allele within its genotype. So, to put this into words, we know that offspring organism 1 has small b as its genotype, but we don't know what organism 1 has. But we know that it has to have at least one small b in order to give rise to recessive organisms, recessive traits within their offspring. But we also know that it has the dominant allele because it is showing an affected trait. Hence, we can determine that organism 1 has big B, small b as its genotype. It cannot have big B, because if it did, the only organisms that pairing could produce would be affected organisms, and that is not the case. As you can see, they are two unshaded shapes, and that means that the organisms are not showing the trait. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so now we know that the offspring, now we can work on the offspring of this pairing. If their children are to show the affected trait, meaning that they have the black eye color, they will have to have at least one dominant allele. Okay? Right. That is coming from organism 1. But we know that organism 2 only has a homozygous recessive genotype pool, so it can only produce or only contribute a small b to the pairing. And that is how we know the genotypes of those two organisms. Right, now we can move on to the other group of organisms as we've worked out this 1, 2, 4, and 5, their genotypes. We know this now. So let's work with organism 3. Organism 3 shows the affected trait. It has black eyes, as well as its partner has black eyes. So, again, we have this dilemma of whether it's big B, or big B, small b. And again, we see they are producing one organism that has small b, meaning that this organism, these two organisms, both have to have at least one small b in their genotype in order to produce this organism here. But we also know that it is affected, showing the dominant trait, so both of these have to have the dominant allele. Okay, now let's go into its offspring. All of these offspring, except for number 6, we don't have any other information on this offspring, this one, or this one. So we will have to say, if this was a question, if this was asked in the question, you will have to say it is either big B, or big B, small b, because we don't know what this crossing has produced. Let's cross it quickly. If you were to cross these two individuals, these would be the alleles that can be produced, and let's just quickly do one of these Punnett squares. Right. Okay, so do you see there's a 3:1 ratio of having black eye color and blue eye color? Okay, so these organisms can produce organisms or offspring with any of these alleles. So you cannot assume without further information that this organism, or this organism has either one of these genotypes, so you can put both. That is an acceptable answer. Okay, so that is the genotypes for those organisms. Now, we do have further information of organism 6 because we know what offspring they produced. And again, we're seeing this organism is producing a recessive, a homozygous recessive organism. So that means, again, organism 6 has to have a recessive allele within its genotype. And because of that, as well as the fact that it is showing the black eye color, you know that it is a heterozygous individual, meaning that it shows the black eye color, but it carries the allele for blue eye color as well. And that is how it produces an offspring with homozygous recessive, because both organisms are heterozygous. Both parents are heterozygous in this pairing. Again, for the same dilemma we had in the previous generation. For these 3, you don't have any further information on their genotypes and the offspring that they can produce. So, again, the genotype for these organisms is either big B, or small b, big B. And that's again with the same kind of pairing that has happened here. The types of genotypes that can be produced from a pairing like this is big B, small b, big B, small b, or small b. So the 7, 8, and 9 can have any one of these genotypes. We don't know because we don't have any further information. And that is how you leave your answer. So if you guys have any other questions, please leave it down in the comments below and I will answer them. If there's anything else that you want me to discuss in pedigrees, I will be happy to do so. Just let me know. Hope this helps.